The narrative structure is regarded as the framework of a story. It refers to the organization and presentation of a story to the reader or audience. It encompasses the elements of plot, character setting and theme, along with the techniques and devices the author employs to convey these elements. It also arranges the various parts of the story, including the beginning, middle, and end. The narrative structure also heavily depends on the genre, as a crime story would follow a different narrative structure than a fantasy story. With a strong narrative structure, writers can effectively convey to readers what is happening and the significance of the events. The narrative structure of a novel depends on how the writer chooses to organize the text. While the plot is based on the events themselves, the narrative structure determines how these events are ordered. The stages in a linear narrative structure differ from those in a circular narrative structure. This is because writers often select narrative structures that best suit their content. Different narrative structures emphasize the themes of the text in unique ways through the order of events. Before we explore the various types of narrative structures, let's first understand what the different parts of a narrative structure, specifically the beginning, middle, and end, consist of. First, there is the exposition, which serves as the introduction to the story's setting, characters, and situation. Next comes the rising action, which is a series of events that build tension and move the story toward the climax. Then we have the climax, the point of highest tension or conflict in the story, often involving a decisive moment or choice. The climax is followed by the falling action, which depicts the aftermath of the climax and shows how the story's conflicts are resolved or further complicated. Finally, we have the resolution, or the final outcome of the story, where loose ends are tied up and the characters' fates are revealed. These elements can differ in their presentation and significance depending on the specific narrative and the author's objectives. Nevertheless, understanding these fundamental components of narrative structure can aid both readers and writers in better appreciating and analyzing all kinds of stories. Aristotle's Poetics establishes the foundation of narrative structuring. Aristotle asserts that all stories should have a beginning, middle, and end. To create a compelling story, he maintains that there must be cohesion among these three parts, with one event naturally leading to the next. In Aristotle's words, a beginning is that which is not itself necessarily after anything else and which has naturally something else after it. An end is that which is naturally after something itself, either as its necessary or usual consequent and with nothing else after it. And a middle, that which is by nature after one thing and has also another after it. There are 5 types of narrative structures: linear, nonlinear, circular, parallel, and interactive. Others include framed or episodic structures. In linear narrative plot structure, the events of the story are presented in chronological order, meaning the plot moves continuously forward. However, this does not exclude jumps to the past, such as flashbacks. When past moments occur in a linear narrative structure, they are clearly identified by the writer as past events or events that are not in chronological order. One example of this kind of narrative structure is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Nonlinear plot structure contrasts with linear plot structures as events unfold in a non-chronological sequence. For instance, the book's opening scene might depict the last event chronologically. Writers employing this structure utilize literary devices like flashbacks to navigate back and forth in time within the narrative. Literature written by Holocaust survivors and their children often employs non-linear plot structures. This structure mirrors their experience of being trapped in trauma where conventional linear time no longer exists. Stories following the circular narrative plot structure end where they began. The events ultimately lead back to the initial setting scene imagery and even the event that started the story. John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men follows a circular narrative structure where the opening scene of George and Lenny at the riverbed is mirrored in the final scene. The parallels between the opening and ending scenes emphasize the differences in circumstances, intensifying the tragedy of the death. In the parallel plot narrative structure, multiple storylines unfold simultaneously and may intersect with one another. These storylines can be connected by a shared event character or theme. Example: Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. More recently, Nick Bradley's The Cat and the City consists of short stories featuring various characters in Tokyo whose narratives run parallel to each other and occasionally intersect. All these parallel stories are united by the theme of cats in Tokyo. In the interactive plot narrative structure, the reader or viewer has influence over the narrative and can choose between fixed options to determine what happens next. This plot structure encourages reader participation. An example of this narrative structure is the children's book Huff and Puff by Claudia Rueda. Now let us look at some examples of narrative structures and their key characteristics. Three-act structure divides story into three parts, namely setup, confrontation, resolution. The Fichtean curve emphasizes rising tension and conflict followed by sudden climax and resolution. The hero's journey involves a call to adventure, journey into the unknown, challenges and obstacles, and return home with newfound wisdom. The 7-point structure includes 7 key plot points such as hook, inciting incident, climax, and resolution. Freytag's pyramid is a 5-act structure that includes exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. The Save the Cat beat sheet involves 15 key plot points such as opening image, theme stated, and final image. We will now discuss each of these in greater detail. 3-act structure. Stories following the 3-act structure divide the narrative into beginning, middle, and end. Sid Field formalized this structure in screenplay, dividing the acts into setup, confrontation, and resolution. Act 1. In the setup, the setting, characters, and narrative world are established. Then an inciting incident kicks the story into motion, serving as a plot point that propels the narrative into the next act. The major dramatic question is raised here, which will be answered in the climax. This could include: will the hero save the day? Will the detective find the killer? Will the couple end up together? 2. In the confrontation, tension and crises escalate as rising action unfolds. The second act traces the protagonist's journey from a midpoint crisis to the second turning point. The protagonist encounters trials, enemies, and allies grappling with the challenges of the new world. An event occurs that conflicts with the protagonist's primary goal, testing them. However, they are unable to overcome this test. This prompts the protagonist to reflect and learn more about themselves to discover what they can truly achieve. Act 3. The final act builds to a climax and concludes with the resolution denouement. The protagonist is now faced with two choices: to try again or to fail. They confront the final challenge once more, drawing on the lessons learned in the second act, and typically emerge victorious. In the denouement, a new normalcy is established, all unanswered questions are resolved, and any consequences resulting from the climax are revealed. The film Star Wars adheres to the three-act structure narrative framework. Act 1. The film begins with the introduction of the story and continues until the Death Star captures the Millennium Falcon. Act 2. Obi-Wan attempts to deactivate the tractor beam's power to prevent the Millennium Falcon from escaping. Meanwhile, Luke, Han, and Chewie endeavor to rescue Princess Leia. Other minor problems are also addressed, but the primary threat, the Death Star, still looms large. Act 3. Eventually, Luke and his friends destroy the Death Star and defeat the Empire. Fichtean curve. The writer and Professor John Gardner formalized the Fichtean curve in the art of fiction. By studying various narratives, he identified three essential elements: rising action, climax, and falling action. This narrative structure is commonly employed in fast-paced, character-driven stories. In the Fichtean curve, the protagonist begins already in the rising action, so there isn't always a period of normal life established. From this point to the climax, world-building, character development, backstory, and exposition unfold. The protagonist faces several escalating crises, with each crisis serving as a key plot point. Two-thirds into the narrative, the climax occurs, marking a crisis at the peak of tension. This turning point changes the protagonist's course of action. At this stage, the protagonist cannot turn back and must either confront the core conflict directly or face the consequences of failure. Traditionally, the protagonist emerges victorious, leading to the falling action. The falling action follows the climax and precedes the resolution. It is the part of the story where all loose ends are tied up, the protagonist's character arc is completed, and a new normal may be established. This phase also represents the protagonist's transformation or change. An example of a story written in the Fichtean curve is L. Frank Baum's The Wizard of Oz. In this story, the rising action begins with Glinda, the Good Witch of the South, instructing Dorothy to travel to the land of Oz to see the wizard and giving her a pair of silver slippers. On her journey, Dorothy meets Scarecrow, Tin Woodman, and Cowardly Lion. When they reach the land of Oz, the wizard informs them that he will help them if they can eliminate the Wicked Witch of the West. The climax occurs when Dorothy successfully defeats the witch. The falling action unfolds as Dorothy, Scarecrow, Tin Woodman, and Cowardly Lion each receive their wishes fulfilled, and Dorothy is able to return home by clicking her slippers together and speaking her wish aloud. The hero's journey. This is perhaps the most well-known narrative structure. The writer and Professor Joseph Campbell observed patterns in literary texts and proposed the narrative structure of the hero's journey in his seminal work The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Campbell argued that similar storytelling traits are present in mythology from around the world. Hollywood screenwriter Christopher Vogler later simplified Campbell's 17 stages into 12. Here are Vogler's 12 stages of the hero's journey. The ordinary world, the hero's normal life, and the status quo of society are established. Call to adventure. The hero is given a call to embark on an adventure. Refusal of the call. The hero initially refuses the call and is uncertain about taking on the challenge. Meeting the mentor. The hero encounters a mentor, a supernatural aide who is knowledgeable and experienced in what lies ahead. For example, a character seeking to improve their magical skills might find a wizard as their mentor. Crossing the first threshold. The hero crosses into the new world, leaving behind the familiar. Tests, allies, enemies. The hero faces a series of tests, encounters allies, and confronts enemies. Approach to the inmost cave. The hero approaches the central conflict or challenge. Ordeal. The hero faces a major obstacle or ordeal and must overcome it. Reward. After overcoming the ordeal, the hero obtains the reward, achieving their initial goal and nearing victory. The road back. The hero realizes that the journey is not yet over. The reward may have unintended consequences or new challenges arise. Resurrection. The hero faces a climactic challenge, using everything they've learned on their journey to overcome it. Return with the elixir. The hero is victorious and returns to their ordinary world with the elixir or treasure, bringing positive change or healing. Let's examine J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and follow the hero's journey of Bilbo Baggins. Tolkien establishes the ordinary world in the Shire, depicting Bilbo as a respectable hobbit who avoids adventures. The call to adventure begins when Gandalf unexpectedly arrives and asks Bilbo to join 12 dwarfs on a burglary expedition. Bilbo initially refuses the call.
Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you, not today.
Gandalf then assumes the role of the mentor in the Meet Their Mentor stage. Gandalf, with his ability to cast magic spells, saves the group multiple times. When Bilbo leaves the Shire with the dwarfs and Gandalf, they cross the first threshold and begin their journey. They encounter a series of tests and adversaries, such as losing their supplies and being captured by trolls and goblins. The inmost cave is a literal cave in the lonely mountain guarded by the dragon Smaug. Bilbo's ordeal is facing the dragon alone. Overcoming his fear and reluctance for adventure, Bilbo outwits the dragon with riddles to discover its one weakness. This knowledge proves crucial when Bard the Bowman later kills Smaug. The reward is the treasure hoard and the Arkenstone, allowing the dwarfs to reclaim their home in the lonely mountain. Although the initial challenge is overcome on the journey back, issues arise regarding the fair distribution of the gold. Bilbo resolves this by compromising with all parties, demonstrating his maturity. In the resurrection stage, Bilbo and the dwarfs face a military attack by goblins. However, allies Bilbo has made along the way come to their aid in the Battle of Five Armies. Following their victory, Bilbo returns to his old life in the Shire in the Return with the Elixir stage. His elixir is the knowledge, character development and friendships he acquired on his journey. 7-point story structure. This is another variation of Campbell's hero's journey and was popularized by the author Dan Wells. Writers using this structure first determine how the narrative arc should end and then work backwards from there. The 7-point story structure comprises the following elements. Opening hook. This is the initial attention-grabbing moment that draws the reader in, introducing them to the protagonist and the world they inhabit. Plot point 1. This marks the inciting incident, setting the story's events into motion and initiating the protagonist's journey. Pinch point 1. At this juncture, the protagonist encounters a setback or conflict, often due to the emergence of an antagonist or a challenging situation. Midpoint. This pivotal moment sees the main character undergo a significant change in direction or perspective, typically responding to a call to action in the hero's journey. Pinch point 2. Here another obstacle presents itself, seemingly pushing the protagonist to the brink of failure or defeat. Plot point 2. The protagonist has a realization or epiphany that helps them overcome their obstacles and confront the central conflict. Resolution. All conflicts are resolved, the antagonist is defeated, and a new sense of normalcy is established. The protagonist's character arc reaches completion. The film Casablanca exemplifies a movie that adheres to the 7-point story structure. Opening hook. People are attempting to flee Nazi-controlled areas in Europe to North America, but they must pass through Casablanca, where they are likely to become trapped. Plot point 1. Ugarte flees as the police come to arrest him. Pinch point 1. Major Strasser attempts to strike a deal with Ilsa and Laszlo. Midpoint. Ilsa initially refuses to leave without her husband, but at the last minute Ferrari reveals that Rick likely has the letters of transit. Pinch point 2. German officers get into a brawl with French patrons in Rick's bar after they start singing the national anthem. Plot point 2. Ilsa visits Rick's office and pleads for the letters of transit, eventually revealing her love for him. Resolution. Rick shoots Major Strasser and Ilsa and Laszlo leave the country. Freytag's Pyramid. The 5-point narrative structure draws inspiration from the classical Greek tragedies of Euripides' Aeschylus and Sophocles, following the storyline of a tragedy. This narrative structure was coined by the 19th-century German playwright and novelist Gustav Freytag. It begins with the introduction exposition, where the status quo and normal life are established and the inciting incident occurs. During the rising action, the protagonists actively pursue their goal and the stakes become higher. In the climax, the protagonist reaches the highest point of conflict and can no longer return to the normal life they knew before. In the falling action after the climax, instead of conflicts resolving and reaching resolution, tension increases. The story ends with the catastrophe rather than resolution. Here the protagonist's fears have overwhelmed them and they are at their lowest point. We can find the Freytag's pyramid structure in William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Let's have a quick look at how the structure is present in the play. Exposition involves the events shown before the Capulet household's party. Rising action sees Romeo and Juliet getting married secretly. Tybalt and Romeo enter a duel resulting in the deaths of Tybalt and Mercutio. Romeo is banished and Juliet devises a plan to fake her death, but Romeo, unaware of the plan, believes she is truly dead. The climax occurs when Romeo commits suicide and Juliet, upon waking and seeing Romeo dead, also takes her own life. Falling action encompasses the events following Juliet's death. Resolution comes when the Montague and Capulet families end their feud. Save the cat beat sheet. In 2005, Blake Snyder formalized this narrative structure using 15 beats to shape the story. First, the opening image presents readers with a scene that introduces the setting and sparks their curiosity. In the theme-stated section, a hint is given of what is to come in the story. The setup establishes the protagonist's ordinary world. The catalyst is the inciting incident that kicks the story into motion. This is followed by the debate, where the protagonist initially refuses the call to action but is eventually compelled into it. In the break into two-part, the protagonist makes a decisive choice to begin their journey. In the B story, a subplot is introduced, often a romantic one, which emphasizes the story's theme. The promise of the premise, also called fun and games, showcases the entertaining side of the plot. For example, in a romance genre, this would be where the characters fall in love. The midpoint is where a plot twist occurs, raising the stakes and making it harder for the hero to achieve their goal. It can also mark the point where they shift focus to a new goal. Tension increases as the bad guys close in, with the protagonist facing more intense obstacles and their plans failing. All is lost when the hero reaches their lowest point. In the Dark Night of the Soul section, the hero, having lost everything, finds new information that offers a glimmer of hope. In the break into 3, the protagonist decides to make one last attempt after discovering this new information. In the finale, the protagonist confronts the main conflict, sees the real truth, and resolves their story. Finally, in the final image, readers see a concluding moment or scene where the protagonist has undergone significant change. Hafsa Faisal utilized the Save the Cat beat sheet to write We Hunt the Flame. Narrative structure analysis and character arcs. Another crucial aspect of narrative structure is the development of the character arc. This arc represents the transformation and growth of a character from the beginning to the end of the story. Stories are typically driven by either a plot arc or a character arc. In a plot arc, the narrative follows an external goal. In a character arc, the story focuses on the characters' emotions as they work to resolve internal conflicts and answer personal questions. Positive growth character arcs. In this type of arc, the protagonist overcomes false beliefs or fears they had about themselves and emerges as a better person by the end of the story. Example of this is Zuko in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Negative tragic character arcs. Protagonists with this arc retain their flaws and false beliefs, ultimately leading to their downfall. Example: Voldemort from the Harry Potter series. Static character arcs. In this arc, the protagonist's core beliefs and values are challenged but remain unchanged by the end of the story. Example: Sherlock Holmes in The 5 Orange Pips. In summary, the following are some of the key aspects of narrative structure. Narrative structure is the framework of a story dictating how the plot is organized. The components of narrative structure include the beginning, middle, and end. The 5 types of narrative structures are linear, non-linear, circular, parallel, and interactive. Examples of narrative structures include the Fichtean curve, 3-act structure, 7-point structure, Freytag's pyramid, the hero's journey, and the Save the Cat beat sheet.